The Failure Hypothesis is a Meledro digital production. If you're interested in making business content with interest or want to tell your story in a future episode, you can contact us at info@meledrodigital.com.
Hi, my name is Vivian Chan, and you're listening to The Failure Hypothesis. Over the course of this podcast series, I'm going to be talking to some of the most interesting leaders from all around the world. From Brazil to the UK, from India to America, all about failure. We'll be testing the simple hypothesis that radical honesty about failure is the secret to success. But is it really that simple? Sometimes, is it better to just keep moving forward? Why can't we just think like a rocket scientist when it comes to failure? To help us find out the answer to these questions and more, we've assembled a dream team of guests that includes the chief scientist of a global tech company, the president of a major record label, a private equity titan, and a Webby Award-winning podcaster. For new listeners who want to learn more about the failure hypothesis and the timeless mission to get the leaders of today and tomorrow all talking more openly about failure, please check out episode 1, wherever you get your podcasts. My guest today is Scott Mackin, as the managing partner of Denham Capital, a global private equity firm that specializes in sustainable energy. He works in one of the industries most critical to the future of our planet. As a lawyer turned CEO turned private equity titan who has worked all around the world, he has, over the last 30 years, enjoyed the type of career that many aspiring executives dream of. But as we shall talk about today, the path hasn't always been so smooth and straightforward. And really, Scott's success has been hard-won. Behind all of the accolades, titles, and deals, I know Scott as a thoughtful and determined leader who gives willingly of his time to mentor and invest in future leaders, especially women. I have personally benefited from his support and guidance, and I'm delighted to have him on the show to share his story. So, Scott, let's talk a little bit about failure. Are you ready to go back?
I am, and first, thank you very much for having me here, and I'm very proud also to be involved with you as an investor.
Amazing. So, you have the floor. Where would you want to take us on this journey when you want to start talking about a failure story?
Well, I have not scripted this, so let's maybe get right into where things got tough. I had been running the energy division for a company that, when I first joined it, I believe it was a Fortune 500 company. It was a conglomerate. It was called Ogden Corporation out of New York City. And I had run their energy division for 9 years. And it was clear that the rest of the company, which had disparate interests in entertainment-related entities and businesses, same thing in aviation, a little bit with some environmental services, that the wheels maybe were coming off a little bit in terms of the issues that had happened there. So there was a proxy fight, and in order to win the proxy fight, they brought on a couple of new directors. One had been a private equity guy who'd done quite well in the entertainment space, and another fellow had run McKinsey at the end of a very long career there. And so that happened in 1999. And they, in September of 1999, moved the...
How old were you, if I may ask?
Well, I've got to do quick math here. I was 42.
Okay, yeah.
I'd been running the energy division since age 33. They moved the CEO out and asked me to take over as CEO of the company. And it was actually a pretty eventful day. There was a hurricane. I can't remember what it was. But our offices were at Two Penn Plaza above Madison Square Garden. And that hurricane had been moved up the East Coast. And it was coming into New York City that day.
In celebration.
In celebration.
Of your appointment.
Well, there was some tension first because, the board dismissed everybody but the board. And the CEO, who was about to be moved out, was pacing in front of my office with his general counsel and his CFO. And then they sent a lawyer down to come get me. And I had to walk past them all and go upstairs and talk to the board. And they asked me if I'd take the position.
Did you know beforehand that they were going to ask you?
I didn't. It was one of a few things that could have happened. But I had talked to Goldman Sachs, who had been an advisor for the company, and they said it was their recommendation to the board that I take over with some conditions. Mm-hmm. And one of those conditions was that I bring in a restructuring advisor. And that was, about, as I sort of referenced before, that the wheels were sort of coming off some of the other divisions. So I had to walk past the CEO and his general counsel and his CFO and go upstairs and then come back down again. Mm-hmm. And then they asked for him. Mm-hmm. So
how did you feel? Were you nervous? And
yeah, of course I was.
Yeah, walking past them. Any words exchanged?
You
don't have to share there if you don't want to.
No, there really wasn't at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think people could understand what was going on. There really wasn't at the time.
Mm-hmm. So how did you feel? I mean, a young age, being able to be kind of appointed as CEO, but you knew that the challenge ahead was going to be quite immense. Yeah.
So the first thing I did was issue, as the press release that said you're going to be the CEO. The first thing I did was say, in any earnings guidance that has been given by the company, I disavow, and we're going to not give a dividend anymore.
Okay. How was that received?
Well, as you can imagine, the stock went from somewhere around $21, $22 to somewhere around $10, $11 in a day. Mm. And hedge funds mostly came in and bought up that stock. So yeah, that was my first day at work.
So why did you choose to start with that story?
Well, I think it's got a combination of sort of, work-related things, personal things that I just think resonates. And to be honest, I mean, as I've gotten a bit older, it's easier to talk about failure, mm-hmm. but still, that one's enough removed mm-hmm. that the sting isn't quite so bad.
How do you feel right now talking about it?
I feel fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel fine talking about it.
It's good. Not much sting then.
No. Yeah, I feel worse about England losing the other day.
As we all. How did you sleep that night? Sorry, and this might be too personal, but I was just really curious, especially with the emotions.
I lived out in the suburbs of New York City, and I knew this was going to be sort of 24/7. So I took a hotel mm-hmm. That night and asked my assistant to go home and get my bag and whatever. And I probably got 4 or 5 hours sleep, and then was running on adrenaline.
I'm very curious about the kind of whole chronological order of the fact that you were appointed CEO at 42, and then leading up to it. What is the biggest failure moment for you in that journey?
That's a really hard question. I think there's sort of twofold, but maybe I should sort of take you through it chronologically a little bit to help answer your question. So I'm appointed CEO. I figure out that there's a hole because of these public arenas. Mm-hmm. I find a solution. The banks don't want that solution. I then try to do an IPO. We bring these disparate banking facilities all together into one facility. We button it up and we give ourselves enough time in that facility to try an IPO the next year. Mm-hmm. So we do all that. We're getting ready to file for an IPO. Enron happens.
Oh.
pretty soon nobody wants to touch anything in the public markets that has anything to do with energy, particularly if it's fraught with complicated things about letters of credits and hockey facilities and things like that. So that market just dried up. So I very quickly put a for sale sign in the entire company. And again, nobody wanted any piece of that.
And that was what, 18 months after?
So I was made CEO in September of 99, and brought the banks the deal in the first quarter of 2000. They turned that down second quarter 2000. Went in the first half of probably May of 2001 for an IPO.
Mm-hmm.
Enron didn't really blow up, but the public markets, they hadn't blown up yet.
Yeah.
The famous Barron's article hadn't come out yet, but you could feel the public markets knew it. They were receding already. I had gotten calls from equity analysts asking me questions about things on Enron's balance sheet. And I mean, people were starting to figure it out. And so then we then started a sales process and couldn't get that. So by 2002, I knew I had to file bankruptcy.
Wow. How'd you feel with that journey of 3 years?
I felt pretty crummy.
Mm-hmm.
Felt pretty crummy. I knew I'd done everything I possibly could, with the exception of being at that table with the banks negotiating that banking facility. It wasn't that I didn't, I delegated. I knew all the things. It would have been whether my force of personality or my knowledge there at the table would have effectuated more runway. What we would have done with that runway, I don't know, because the public markets, they always take a while to come back after things like Enron. But in any event, I knew I'd done pretty much everything I could do. My energy business was prospering.
Mm.
I didn't need any money from the banks.
Mm-hmm.
Needed nothing from them.
Mm-hmm.
What I had was these letters of credit that I needed to get rid of. And if you owe somebody $100 and you can't pay them, then hedge funds will buy it for 60 cents or whatever on the dollar. And now your new lenders are hedge funds. And quite often they'll repackage something and off you go.
And off you go, yeah.
But when you have letters of credit, they can't do that. Hedge funds can't issue you letters of credit. And so it was really a sort of Damocles around my neck. These letters of credit were a real problem. And what I had also was these springing letters of credit requirement at my level. It was something that David Sokol had negotiated earlier on. And so you had more letter of credit requirements, and I needed to protect that energy business. So I needed to file bankruptcy because you get the automatic stay.
Yeah.
It was both empowering and humiliating. And in the midst of this, at age 44, I was told that I had heart disease.
Oh, wow.
I had my GP called me up on a Sunday night, and he said, I'm just looking at your electrocardiogram compared to last year's, and it's different. And it's probably nothing, but you should go see a specialist. So I went to see.
And this is all while, the in-between phone calls are getting bankruptcy filed.
Well, the first time this happened was actually 2001, so you're in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
And I went to these cardio specialists, and I did a lithium stress test where they run lithium through your body. You get on a treadmill, and then they take 60 plus photos of the going through your system, and they see if there's blockage. Mm-hmm. And they said, you might have some blockage here. Come back in a year. And I was what helped keep me sane is I either ran or played basketball. I did something every single day. I mean, I was in very, very good shape. You were
talking about basketball, and
so I went back.
So this is unexpected, completely unexpected.
Totally out of the blue, and nobody in my family had died of heart ailment. So the next year, I went to my GP, and he said, you really need to go back and see another specialist. I did. Went to see that specialist. They said, we think you have blockage now. We think you have 2 arteries blocked. And I go back to my GP, and he goes, I think this is worthwhile to get a second opinion. Usually I wouldn't say that, but an angiogram is not the world's biggest deal. They put a catheter up inside you. They shoot dye in you and have this procedure. So I went to the head of cardiology at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. It's where Bill Clinton got his stent put in. You know, this guy, literally, he had so many titles, doctorates, that it was on both sides of his card.
Wow.
And he told me, definitely you've got two arteries involved. And if it's a third, then you're going to need bypass surgery.
Wow.
So I had 10 days between then and when I can go and do my angiogram, where I know I have to file bankruptcy. And I'm being told I have heart disease. And that was maybe the lowest moment in my life.
I was going to say, actually, did you think it was stress-induced? Did you think it was actually correlated with the professional, what you had to go through?
Blockage? I don't think so, but I don't know. Who knows? I didn't know. I just know I think the technical term is I was in the shitter. It just really sucked. It really sucked bad.
And if that is your lowest moment, how did you pick yourself back up?
So I went for the angiogram, and this male nurse starts quizzing me before heart disease in the family, this, that, and everything else. And then he says to me, you know, they have false positives sometimes. And I said, yeah, but I've had two opinions on this. So they give me a little Valium. They put me in the operating theater. I feel the hot rush of dye shoot up the back of my brain. I watch these two doctors. It's a teaching hospital. And an older British doctor and a young American, and they're just watching the screen and you can see what's going on up there, and they're talking. I can't hear a word they say. So after a while, finally the younger guy turns to me and he says something, and I was like always kind of grab him by the collar. It's like, I'm sorry, what? What'd you say? And he goes, oh, your heart's fine. I wish I had your heart.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
And I'd love to tell you that I felt instantaneous relief. To this day, I don't feel relief.
Oh.
To this day, I'm still dented by, sort of what happened there, of being told. I remember walking on a hike with my kids thinking, if I have to bypass surgery and do all this stuff at this young age,
walk me through that. Why do you feel that you're still maybe in a dent in that whole situation? Because it's the unknown of why two separate opinions,
It was funny, the head cardiologist at Columbia Presbyterian came in and he was actually pissed that he was wrong. He goes, really? He says, how could that be? So, well, maybe your lungs got in the way of this thing. It was my fault. I'm sorry. My lungs got in the way. It's probably because I run all the time. And he had once told me I was Jim Fix waiting to happen, the runner who died of a heart attack. Again, my fault. It's I think left over from my youth of, I always harken back to The World According to Garp, which is a great book. And they made it into a great movie with Robin Williams, but they used to warn the kids all the time about the undertow.
Yep.
And it was all this anxiety in the family about the undertow. And the kids thought this was something called the undertowed, which was this big frog that would pull them into the water and take them away. There was all this concern about things going wrong. And I think I had that concern all the time.
Yeah.
And that was my aha moment. See, I was concerned for a reason.
Yep.
I am going to have this heart disease and everything's going to be messed up. I'm filing bankruptcy with this company. And, my kids are being put in the crapper themselves, my ex-wife, and everything is bad. Everything is bad right now. So yeah, it was pretty bad. And I don't suffer from it today, but if I go back and talk about it now, it's not like I can pull back and say, that was a relief. That's fine. You don't feel that way. I imagine there's plenty of people who had medical things in the past where it still haunts them. This one, I know the basic structure of my heart is great, and I know I'm still, in great shape and all that. But yeah, it definitely dented me. So that's the purely sort of personal side. But on the sort of career side, about being CEO and presiding over something for bankruptcy, had I come out of that bankruptcy, which we did, I brought in a net operating loss vehicle that Sam Zell, the real estate guy, is known as the grave dancer. The sort of guy who bought the Chicago Tribune, put in very little money, over-levered it, and then we all went bankrupt. And so he generated NOLs and things like that. So I brought him in, and had I come out and had had the banks and the Sam Zell, and everybody said, "You are our savior. You're the guy who walked us through the forest and got us out the other side, or walked us through the valley of death and got us on the other side. We want you to stay there." I probably would have been felt good. But instead, the bank group said, "We don't want you anymore."
Interesting.
At the end. And the reason why is because I was more interested in preserving value than the workout guys at the banks. And concomitant to preserving value, I had a really good energy team. I had, people who were dedicating their lives to doing something that worked. We didn't have an ounce of problems with my energy stuff. We grew our EBITDA by quite a bit during the bankruptcy. We were adding projects during the bankruptcy. We had little problems here or there. For a while, we weren't paid in India. Well, get in line. Covanta, I renamed the company Covanta Energy. Ultimately made 2 times money on that Indian project. So yeah, we had some perturbations for a while, but we ultimately made money on that. Other projects, they did quite well. I mean, on all of that. But I wasn't giving the banks what they wanted.
Yeah.
I was, they wanted, again, 60 or 70 cents on the dollar. They wanted me to tear everything apart and sell it in pieces. And I knew that we weren't going to necessarily make money that way. But I did sell some assets for them to appease them. I'd already sold enough assets and was generating enough income that I didn't need any of their money.
And when you're talking about preserving value, here you're specifically talking about keeping a team, or?
The team and the assets, which, and very much in a Gestalt fashion, were worth more than the sum of the parts. But this is what I mean. After Sam Zell took over that company and I left, he had a lot of EBITDA from waste energy, which was not a growth business, but it was solid business, from the other independent power stuff that we had done overseas. Had he added in wind and solar and got into that, and added that, you ultimately would have added a growth trajectory to that, and a growth multiple on your EBITDA, and would have upped the value of that. Instead, they made a really dumb decision of selling the IPP stuff and going headlong into garbage, and wasted, a lot of money. I mean, 50 million here, 50 million there, trying to do waste energy in places like China where you just got their head handed to them, and other things like that. And so if you kept that business as it was, a mixture of independent power, waste energy, and then you grew it from there with wind and solar, that would have been a hugely successful company that would have transacted quite well. And the team would have prospered. And I felt, I guess in my family, I was sort of born with the responsibility gene. My mom had it too. I mean,
mother of 5.
Keeping 5 kids together. And let me tell you, we were no box of chocolates, none of us. Even though I did my homework, and I was the only one who ever did of the 5 brothers, I was still not a box of chocolates. So she had the responsibility gene, but I had that as well. And I felt responsible that those people who were working in that energy business day to day, they needed stability and security, and not to just have this company torn apart by people. When you go into bankruptcy, bottom feeders go into the banks and they say, "I'll give you X for this business." Well, of course, X is bottom feeding.
Yeah.
And then if they were successful with that deal, not only would the banks would be taking a gun and shooting themselves in their head, but they had that as a habit. I mean, once you get in the workout guys, they're not about creating value. I get paid just to be done and dusted with this. I don't care how much value I destroy. I don't care how many people get laid off. I don't care. I'll go home and kick my cat when the day's over. None of this matters. And I have to say there's one exception, and he's deserving of a name. There was a fellow named Tom Biaggi at Bank of America who was not like that. He was a really good guy. He was an excellent guy. And I don't want to condemn but when you've got a rabble of 37 banks and the lowest common denominator, people had lender fatigue and they just wanted out. So I would say I fought against them. And so it was a kick in the teeth to be told. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yep.
To leave Covanta. I mean, I exited with a nice package. That's great. But oh my God, I'd been in that company for 17 years, being promoted from assistant general counsel at a subsidiary to CEO of the parent entity. It's time to move on. And I've had a wonderful career at Denham and continue to. And it's been fantastic. And I've learned so much about the alternative side of the business, which is much more sane to me than the public side of the business. I enjoyed it a lot more. So thank God that happened. But at the time, it was a kick in the teeth.
This is interesting because what you called, which I love, called the responsibility gene, it actually helped shape your own definition, right? So in the professional, the bank's perspective, they would have seen it as a failure or not as much of a success as it could have been. But you redefined what failure meant. And you kind of went, no, from my responsibility gene, this is the way I want to go from it. And you actually turned that around. And that ended up being the right kind of exit for you.
Yeah, you could say I took one for the team at the end of the day. But never a good deed goes unpunished. I mean, I have people from that day, from that era, who are great and they get it and they understand everything that went on. The guy who took over, I had one request, and he had been in my college dorm when back in uni. I mean, and he had been with me for 15 of the 17 years. And I lobbied very hard to make him CEO of that entity when I left.
What was that one request?
One request was, when all the people from the field come in, that's when I'd like to have a goodbye dinner. Because I don't want to just sit with 15 schmoes that I see all the time in any event.
Yeah.
I wanted the people in the field were always kind of special to me.
Yeah.
And
how often did they come in?
I would generally see them once a year, not necessarily in, but at least, out in the field, or we'd have events somewhere. But I got to know them. I'd been a long time there with them. And, I kind of felt like more connected to them in many respects. And they never did that.
Wow.
They never
Not
did
even that one request.
Yeah. So they did other things that were very accommodating, but not that.
Are you still connected to some of those people in the field today?
Yeah. A lot of them have reached out to me on LinkedIn and, go back and forth. And then there were people in the headquarters office that were also that I felt pretty connected to as well. And I've stayed in touch with. So, it was good. I could definitely hold my head high. But if you talk about failure, right? I mean, that's the purpose of all this talk about failure. Even though I look at those arenas as sort of an immovable object, I still tend to think that I could have brought about a different resolution, knowing what I know now. Can't tell you exactly what it would be. It might have been taking the whole company by hostage and going to the bank group and saying, I'm going to file everything bankruptcy right away. And sort of scaring them into doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. When I did go into bankruptcy, I had a letter of intent from KKR to take the energy group out of bankruptcy. But again, they didn't want that. The bank group wanted, when you're dealing with lowest common denominator, they wanted really something more destructive of value than to do that. They wanted me to just tear everything apart. And I, as I say, I tore a little bit here or there, but I didn't tear everything apart. But nobody wants to be age 45, having led a major company through a bankruptcy, being asked by the bank group, we don't want to see you anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, probably because I was, they were just pissed at me I know it was because they were pissed at me. But I preserved them value. I got them a lot more value than they would have got if they had done what they wanted to do.
And what would the present Scott say to that?
Now we're going into therapy?
I don't know. It just came to me to ask that question about. It's interesting that you have a sense of what if and thinking about that.
I did ultimately, when I went to bankruptcy, got great advice by a fellow out of Chicago named Matt Rosenberg, who's a restructuring advisor, among other things. And one of the smarter guys that I know who can cut to the quick on pretty much everything. And he helped me deal with that bankruptcy in ways that nobody else would have done. If I had been able to pull someone like him in right on day one and bring to a head this 300 million hole that you had, letters of credit, one way or the other, decide, yes, we're going to be able to find a solution to that, and here it is with the bank group, and you're going to take that, and if you don't, I'm filing bankruptcy, and you know what? You're not getting 100 cents on the dollar. Had we done that to the guys who were the relationship bankers before there were any busted covenants, before there was anything else, and so before the workout lenders came in, we might have pulled that off. And I'm not saying we would have, but we might have pulled that off and had them extend that facility and say, oh, yes, Apollo. Yes, KKR, 250 million, thank you very much. Here's your 3 to 5 year extension. Go to it and see what you could do. Then I would have other problems on my hands still because I'd have 3 years to get rid of those arenas in one fashion or the other. I sold one to Henry Samueli, the Broadcom billionaire, who then bought the Ducks as well, and sold another to a Bermuda billionaire, Canadian guy who bought Ottawa Senators and that arena. Maybe that hole wouldn't have been 300 million at that time. Maybe you would have gotten it down to 150 or 200. You take your lumps and you move on.
And I've been really appreciative of how open you are with all of the failures that you actually outlined in the podcast today. What do you think, and obviously the theme here is about failure hypothesis, what kind of learnings, if you were to boil it down to even one key learning, what did you think you learned from all the failures or one of them?
Well, sometimes, having the right motivations isn't enough. Being smart, and again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, isn't enough. Sometimes you need help from people who've been there, done that before, and can see things that you don't see. As I said, if I had been able to bring in an advisor earlier on, maybe who was the right advisor, I brought in advisors, just the wrong advisors, but bring in advisors who can cut to the quick and bring things to a head and be willing to, do what I did when I brought that company into bankruptcy. I said to the bank group, look, I want to do you a favor. You can take your letters of credit, you can roll them into what's called a DIP facility, a debtor in possession facility, so you prime everybody else. And then maybe you can help orchestrate this bankruptcy, and I'm doing that as a favor for you. Or I can just file bankruptcy because I don't need your money. I don't need any cash from you. I'm generating a lot of money, thank you very much. And maybe what I should have done is just done that. It's just file bankruptcy, turn them into an unsecured claim, and screw them. And come out on top. And I know that sounds sort of tough, but I didn't have that opportunity to do that because I was playing to see if I could solve everybody's problem at the same time instead of choosing that priority. And I should have maybe chosen priority early on and done that. Bankruptcy would have happened regardless, but how you get through that bankruptcy and what happens at the end may have been, much different.
So Scott, what does the word failure mean to you? And how have your feelings about failure changed over the years?
I think failure, to me, again, I have the responsibility gene. So failure is when you have a responsibility and you don't live up to it.
Is it responsibility or expectations?
I think it's true failure is responsibility. Expectations don't pay the rent. It's like reading your business card. What does it matter? You shouldn't spend much time looking at it. So I think it's responsibilities, and I do think, to sort of say the inverse of that, I think the reason why I have gotten ahead in my career, and in addition to maybe that growth mindset, is that I've always had a sense of responsibility. I've tried to figure out where it is and tried my very best to parse that. And it hasn't always been perfect by any stretch. But if one looks at taking ownership over what they're really supposed to be responsible for, shedding the things that they're not responsible for, and not failing at those, then I think you've done well. I hesitate to say success, but at least you've avoided failure.
I wanted to go back to even like you were talking about your childhood and the relationships there, because often the really strong relationships are made during hardships. So I was really curious about, how that childhood, and maybe if you're open to sharing some of the failures and learnings from those childhood that shapes you into the leader that you are today.
Well, Martin Amis, the famous author, really quite gifted, wrote in one of his books that our parents do damage to us, and my parents had it's almost like a family heirloom, right? Their parents had handed them damage, and they turned around and they handed it to us, and hopefully, as I said about my brothers and myself, hopefully we haven't done that much damage to our kids. So I was, my father, left to his own devices, would start drinking at 11, 12 in the morning. My mom she was both the North Star and the means of support, and like the only financial security, and volatile as hell. Totally.
Emotionally or?
Yeah, anger-wise.
Yeah, okay.
Anger-wise, because she'd been handed some short sticks in her life, quite a bit, and raised 5 sons on her own, which is enough to drive anybody crazy. Yeah. So I have a lot of, love and admiration for her, but what it left me feeling was very unsettled, very insecure, particularly financially, and that there was this slippery slope. My oldest brother died indigent in East LA at age 55. My second oldest brother's doing fine and is done now. He's retired. He's really good. But when we were kids in high school, I mean, he was getting me to do drugs at age 14, and he was.
This is your brother.
Yeah, and he was 3 years older than me.
Is that a way to escape? Was it just?
I didn't want to.
Yeah.
It was kind of peer pressure,
Interesting.
Here, do this.
Interesting.
And it wasn't really my mindset. I didn't really enjoy it. Most of it, I say. Occasionally a little bit. Just maybe a little bit. But mostly it was coming back down that I enjoyed. Yeah. I didn't like going up for the ride, the skyrocket ride. And it wasn't, I kind of talked him through a bad acid trip all night and did things like that. And it was just, I wanted stability and security. Yeah. And that drove my career because of 2 things. One is, again, if you're going to use an old adage, which I think is true, if you live in the future, you're anxious. If you live in the past, you're guilty. If you live in the present, you have contentment. And
that's why it's called present. Present, as in with a bow tie.
Yeah, there you go. So I lived in the future because the present certainly sucked.
Yep, very unsettled.
And I needed to live in the future. And I think that made me a good business person in the sense that I was always thinking about what's coming down the road and thinking about how that plays out. And both my personality type and my legal background sort of made me think of things as a precedent. So if XYZ happened in the past, and I see this same sort of formation happening here lining up, now can I recognize that in advance, and what do I do about that? And I can be pretty logically relentless about trying to push those things. And I learned to control anxiety by trying to control things that can go wrong before they go wrong as best as you can.
Because you were predicting them.
I was trying my very best to sort of see that pattern in advance and predicting them, and impatient if people didn't get there. And I think that and this need to, I didn't need to be the best because I wouldn't have ever been, but I needed to be among the best. I needed to be someone, because to me, if you weren't, then it was a slippery slope and you could fall right down to the bottom. And so I do think that, my youth had a big impact on me. And it's really only these last, few years, having had and still continue to have a good career at Denham with a good team and everything, then I've been able to sort of back off that anxiety level and think more about living in the present. And part of that was actually in my spare time for the last couple of years writing a novel, which is, if there's nothing that's going to get you to live in the present.
Yeah, definitely.
And that has been a key factor.
How did you get into that? Was that something you've always wanted to do?
No, I went, yeah, well, kind of a little bit, but I went to a really good cognitive behavioral therapist, a woman from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And because I wanted to think about, all right, how do I get more to live in the present?
Yeah.
And she gave
So
me,
how did you become aware of that?
um,
Because I guess you were always chasing the future, and you built a career out of that very successfully.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you feel like, ooh, okay, is it because you had the capacity to, or was there a trigger that kind of made you more aware?
I think I hit age 60, and I thought, and I also felt financially secure enough that I thought, this is sort of ridiculous that it's really ridiculous at this point that I'm living in the future.
But there's a lot of people that actually are doing that, but they don't even know that.
Well, my wife nagging in my ear, and I say that affectionately, that I needed to do more to, settle down a little bit and be more. I mean, I shouldn't say settle down because I'm not irascible. She'd probably actually like me to be more emotional, but I'm always thinking about stuff in the future, and I'm the sort of guy who can walk into a room and literally not realize that all the furniture's been rearranged, and sit down in a chair, and I just won't, because I'm in my head, and I'm thinking about something.
What's happening after this meeting?
Yeah, like what's happening after this meeting. You didn't rearrange the furniture in here, did you, today?
How did you know?
So
I hope you like the white chair. It was red.
Now that you mention it. So I decided that I should go, do some work and kind of see what it was. And so this woman, really bright, and she had all kinds of therapy
Did you
background.
just find her, or was it through connection?
I found her, believe it, online. I found some of my best things online. I have, including the main mentor for my novel. I found a lot of things online. Actually, I found my wife online before there was online dating. That's another story that goes back years and years. She gave me these exercises to do, to try, so it's sort of rote CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy exercises. And I was a failure. I was a miserable failure at all of these exercises. And thankfully, she had a lot more, sort of cards up her sleeve than just CBT tricks.
Yep.
And so she finally turned to me and she goes, you need to do something creative, because that's the only thing that is going to get you to live in the moment. And in the early 2000s, I actually had a rock band in New York City. And I wrote all the songs, and we played. So I was like CEO by the day, and trying to doing rock and stuff at the night.
Oh, can you play us something later?
Yeah, like over by the window, and you could help me out.
Could be the soundtrack of the podcast. Just hinting it.
That's pretty funny. And I felt like that it wasn't creative enough, honestly, because I thought I hit my musical limits relatively early on, and I needed to collaborate with other people, and it would just be a lot of work, because I would do all the instruments myself and then give them over to people, and I decided. So I was on another business trip, and the you have to the alert goes on that you have to shut down your laptop and everything. So I had put my work away, and I pulled out my iPhone, and I just started typing fiction in it.
Oh.
I just started, and I thought, well, let me just type some fiction. And I literally felt serotonin in my brain. It was just crazy how I felt. I was ecstatic about it. And
That's amazing.
I showed it to my wife, who thankfully didn't say what she was thinking, which is, this sucks.
But what was the fiction around?
It was putting a guy in a conundrum and having him study his his navel a little bit. And I think the book that comes to mind is Richard Ford, Independence Day, which had a lot of that, but I love the book. Of course, he's accomplished. He was an author. Mine was, sort of junior level at that point, but it was that sort of thing. No plot attended to it, but it was just, you had 25 minutes. And so I decided, I'm going to go do this. And so I started to work on the novel, and it's been, sort of 2.5 years now almost. You get weekend time, evening time, airplane time, stuff like that. And it really made a sea change in how I thought about stuff. And my therapist at one point said, listen, dude, you can't take the least important thing of work as more important than doing that. You have to start to rebalance your time.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was it more of it whenever you felt the words were coming to you?
No.
Yeah.
No, it can't be whenever, because work calls.
Yep.
It does call. But when you're looking at, an African energy report from 4 months ago, you can actually put that away and you can do some writing. That's, it's 4 months ago. If it was important, somebody would have told you about it.
Yeah.
And so, that's the sort of choices that I made. That's why it's been, a couple of years.
So you feel like the creative side is an interesting outlet? For staying in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And being in the present has kind of been your biggest failure.
It had been.
Interesting. Very.
I won't say it was my biggest failure, but it's certainly, I've always said that you show me anybody who is really, really good at something, and there's a flip side to that. Mm-hmm. So Michael Jordan may be the best basketball player there ever was, but I'm sorry, he's kind of a jerk. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think there's others examples I've seen like that. So it served its purpose for me. It definitely served its purpose. It no longer serves its purpose. There's not crises in my present job. We're very measured and thoughtful about how we do things. Things are working. It's a great organization. The guy who founded it runs it the right way. So I don't need to be anxious. I don't need to be living in the future.
That's great. And like you're saying, the creative side, the mentor there is coming back to that theme of the mentor. And actually, she was the one who said, you're failing at being creative initially, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of really forced you to kind of go, oh, okay, there's something here. Mm-hmm. And how's the book coming along now?
I just got final packaging edits from my mentor, who is perhaps the smartest person I've ever met. She's amazingly smart. She's written 7 novels. Her 8th novel is now in the final editing phase with the publisher. Can
you share her name?
Sure, Sarah May. She is.
Oh yeah.
She is really brilliant, and a lot of her writing has reminded me of Martin Amis. She's acerbic. She's witty. She's got a rapier wit, and I could never write as well as her. I couldn't, but I'd like to have, that sort of standard up there to be pulled along with. And she's kicked my ass. I mean,
it sounds like you like the challenge.
Oh, I do. I do. I think that I was not the most intelligent guy. I was not the best athlete. Certainly not the best singer or musician or anything else. The one thing, and I don't know when this hit me, I tend to think it was 3rd, 4th grade. We don't need to go there. But the one thing I think somehow I got was Carol Dweck's growth mindset, which was, if I fail at something, that just shows me how I'm going to go not fail on it, right? I'm really pissed at the time that I have, but now I'm not going to go fail that. Now I'm going to go do that. And, that's very helpful. And so I think, in a sense, Sarah May at one point thought I wasn't necessarily going to come back. Like, she said, so, here's 20 chapters you give me. Let's start with the ones that work. And I'm going to give you comments on those. And they were not just like, oh, you just need to do a little bit here. They were pretty,
honest.
Straightforward. And, and then she looked at these other chapters and said, they don't work. Those chapters don't work. So let's start over again and think about what a chapter needs to do. Mm-hmm. And, and I said, wow, what you just did? You just sort of gave me the Rosetta Stone. So now I can go, every chapter that I write, I can say, I need to do X, Y, Z in that. And now that will carry me to where I need to be. And I can help be the judge of that. And I turned the book around and she said, you have a book.
Wow.
You have a book. And now I'm giving you, these edits. And I think you should do this. And I think you should do that. And then I turned it around again, gave her the whole thing. And she said, these are packaging edits and you can move forward. And, we'll see what happens with it. But I'm, really quite pleased.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how are you feeling about it? Because it's a journey, right? It's not just the end destination or the product of the book.
Right. It served its purpose in terms of getting me in the present. Mm-hmm. It served its purpose in terms of having me feel really productive about something and expanding an area of my mind that I hadn't. Yeah, I've been doing energy for 30 years. Mm-hmm.
Is there friction in energy as well?
I do. I put two people in cauldrons, a woman and a man, and I do it in the context of a startup in the digital media world, run by a luminary who came from the TMT, section, the head of that, one of the bulge bracket banks, who was larger than life character. And so I used my knowledge of corporate settings and all the corporate stuff that I've been through, particularly back at Ogden, because there was a lot of stories back then. And then I wrote a realistic book about a woman who's sexually attacked and about a guy who's got problems from trauma from when he was a kid, and then having to deal with that with his daughter and having a failing marriage, and then have them have to sort of solve a problem together and have her take the lead and him sort of learn courage from her.
So I don't want to spoil the ending. So I'm really curious. Let me know when you finish with editing and packaging it up, and I would love to take that journey one day.
Thank you. Well, I am, I will be going to literary agents later this year, and hopefully somebody picks it up.
Yeah,
we'll see. If not, I'll self-publish.
I'm going to read out the failure hypothesis and would love to hear if you are a believer or a skeptic to this hypothesis. So our greatest failures are our most important experiments. Yet emotion often prevents us from examining and learning from these unexpected outcomes. There is constant pressure to celebrate success and hide failures. However, if we practice radical honesty and have the strength to be vulnerable, then we can turn our failures into the secret of our own success and help others to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I think it's not just business. I think it's personal. I think that many people are very apt to be defensive and not want to own up to
probably even more personal sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, but it applies across the board to both. I think where instead of there's Jocko Willits, an ex-Navy SEAL, wrote this book, Extreme Ownership, and then a follow-on book because I think people took the first one too seriously, like to the extreme, and it was essentially looking at what you own and what you don't own, and it may be counterintuitive, and I'm usually not into those kinds of books, but actually it's all about empowerment of people and not just being the guy who's going to take the hill and put the flag up there and I'm the greatest guy. There's a lot of humility in terms of what they're teaching, and part of that humility is figure out what you could have done better and how you did it. I think actually, you don't know me well enough that I've bored you that much, Vivian, with all the sports metaphors, analogies I use, but Michael Jordan, when he was still active, I remember reading an article where he talked about tearing apart every game. And instead of focusing on all the great things he did, he focused on things he didn't do that he wanted to do. And instead of just lamenting it or finding fault, he played it back in his head to try to get the synapses to work the right way. like envisioning what he should have done. And I think in personal life and in business, the more that we can actually sort of freeze frame and figure out what happened at that moment, or what did we do over that course of that time that we could have done differently. And I'm not seeking atonement for it. I don't have to be guilty for it. I mean, maybe I am, maybe I should have been, but it's independent of that. It's what could I have done better? And so if you're not willing to embrace any sort of failure, if you're not willing to look and say, what could I have done better? Then you'll never get better. You won't get better. It won't happen. But and I literally have just heard that hypothesis anew for the first time. If you take what they've said and said it can be whatever, I'm going to paraphrase, the seed to your success, it actually can, because you can do what Michael Jordan did. You can say, that didn't work. What could have worked? Let me think about that, envision that, and see if I can get the synapses in my head to start working that way for the next time, and create a sort of a vision for something that's better. But you can never do that if it's, to use Michael Jordan as an example, I passed to John Paxson and missed the shot. It's all John Paxson's fault. Instead of saying, well, maybe I hit him with the ball at his knees, or maybe I did this, or maybe I did that. What could I have done? So what is it that I could have done better? And I think that's where people fail. And as I said before, I'm pretty relentless about that in my personal and my business connections. If people aren't willing to look at what they can do better, me too. If they just want to push it on everybody else, then I don't have much patience for them.
So taking us back to the present and a little bit of the future, I don't want to be rushing you about the future too much. What are you currently working on right now?
Well, Denham has built a great sustainable infrastructure franchise. We've been among the firsts in a lot of things that we've done. We were doing solar back when it was called alternative energy, and we did the largest solar project in Italy of its time, and we did the two largest solar projects of the time in Australia. We've done some of the largest first solar projects in Latin America, and built a massive sort of wind project or wind company in Brazil. So we've done all these things, and I think it's got a bright future in the sense of, this world has changed. If I can get on the pulpit for a second, what's happened with the transcendence of wind and solar from things that were expensive to things that are lowest cost is, if you want to get to net zero, you need to electrify everything you possibly can and use wind and solar for it. And so this energy transition is real. And I think Denham is really well positioned to go beyond, to obviously do the same thing we've been doing with firsts in wind and solar, but also to continue on with other energy transition infrastructure. So I think that's the mainstay, and I think I feel very happy about that. I'm quite happy with our team. I would note that in this office here in London, we're 60 or 70% female.
And that was a conscious hiring decision?
Because if you don't push for it, you don't get it. Because everybody, including recruiters, goes to their same old haunts, and they come back with the same people. And it's, we've got a blend of more men in the States that are still a part of this practice, but we've got a back office that's a lot of women. So that is something that's been very important with me. I do, as you know, I do some angel investing on the side, and there I've put my foot down that I really want to back women, because you're painfully aware the statistics are ridiculous about how underfunded women are, and the sort of sexist remarks that get made in meetings with VC firms and angel investors and the like.
Sadly, yes, personally experienced that.
And so if nothing else, I can sort of be impactful that way, even if I'm not really involved with the founder at all, but at least I've put my foot down there. I've made 3 exceptions with male founders out of the sort of 30-ish investments I made. 2 are energy transition technology that I think is Denham wouldn't make a technology investment itself. We build infrastructure with proven technology, so this is not proven yet. And I think they're quite phenomenal. One is called Rondo Energy out of San Francisco, and one is called Desalinator out of the Netherlands. And they're taking what's happened, because again, my point of how low cost renewables are, they're taking renewable power now and turning it into industrial heat that you can use for everything from making cement to desalinating or purifying water to ultimately running turbines and creating electricity. And I feel strongly about those. And then the other was some guy who's, I wanted to be in the Africa crowd. He's an African who really made his career in the States working with Oprah Winfrey and people like that. So I went along for the ride on that one.
And how can people find out a little bit more, both about Denham and also as connecting to you as a potential angel investor?
Well, Denham, we've got a website, and I think that's the best way. So I'd say just to go through the website. In terms of angel investing, I belong to a few networks, and the Alma Angel Network has been, very, very helpful for me. It's
and that's spelling
ALMA. 3 women and a man founded it, and it's focused on women founders.
Is that based in London?
London, based in London, but their membership goes to the States and the continent here, and they have been absolutely wonderful. There's a few other offshoots, Sea Ventures and Hermesa, and then there's some funds that are women led that focus on diversity, like January Ventures, and others that are up in the making, and firms like Zinc and others. And so I've been fortunate to get in that crowd, and it's been wonderful people. So I've really, been a beneficiary of all that. And the best thing is, founders have recommended me to other founders, including one case. One of my early investments was a Sri Lankan woman who is making plastic replacements that are entirely biodegradable. And she was an applied engineer.
Okay.
Started out with seafood waste, but it's becoming polymers, and creating their own polymers.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've heard a lot about the seafood waste. So how did that pivot happen?
They found that they were, I'm not a scientist, so if I get this wrong, you can't sue me. But they found that what they were really trying to do is extract polymers from the seafood waste, and so they should just go to the polymers.
Okay.
And very bright woman. Well, she buzzed me one day and said, "Would you mind talking to my sister?" And these are 2 kick-ass women from Sri Lanka who went to Duke and Stanford, and then I think had other high degrees here, and then worked for fantastic companies. And I'm learning about things that I would not have known about.
It's a great way to learn, isn't it?
Yeah.
Through people, and entrepreneurs especially.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And what I find is a certain humility. I actually, I think I told you before the podcast today that I was listening to a co-invest call, and I turned it down. And one of the reasons why I turned it down is the woman needed to mention 5 or 6 times that she went to Harvard, and it just sort of turned me off.
There's a tip here, listeners. I think being true to yourself is actually one of the most valuable assets as an entrepreneur, and often we kind of forget that along the way, or we often get told to only show the showbiz side. So I really, really appreciate having you on this podcast today to actually bring out the humility, both as a leader, as a male leader, as a father, and also as my mentor as well. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, Vivian, it's a real pleasure, and thank you for having me.
You've been listening to The Failure Hypothesis with me, Vivian Chan. To hear other inspiring stories from unique leaders, please subscribe to The Failure Hypothesis on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening to The Failure Hypothesis, a Meledro Digital production. To find out more about making and appearing in business content with interest, visit our website at meledrodigital.com.